time to tantalize your earbuds with creative makers and shakers. It's Creative Living, the podcast with Jane Klaus.
This is Creative Living, and I am Jane. Thanks so much for joining us today. Now, a lot of you know this, but some of you don't. It's a goal of mine to make sure every single day you are living your most creative life in the healthiest way possible. And so it's this time of the year that we are all overthinking ways to live healthier. So we can continue to learn, we can dive into creativity, we can practice some form of spirituality, and we can surround ourselves with community. These are all great ways to decrease stress and anxiety. We can fuel ourselves with good mental health, but don't forget, nutrition plays a major role in our health, too. So today, we're going to examine the top 21 nutrition myths so you can finally set the record straight, what to eat, what not to eat. Joining me is Brady Holmer. Brady is an expert in exercise science and in physiology and has a master's degree in human performance. And he's also a researcher at examine.com, as he likes to call it. He's a scientist, a writer, and a performance geek. Hey, Brady.
Hi, Jane. Thanks for having me on.
It's great to have you on. So I want to tie in this creative living with healthy living. You, as a physiologist and a human performance master, what got you into this type of research?
Yeah, so I've always been interested in science, and when I started my graduate degree, I became very interested in writing about science, not only from kind of like an academic publishing type of thing, but from a popular science perspective and learning how to like communicate science. And so in doing that, a few areas, I guess, came up in terms of like, this really needs to be addressed. And I think these are areas where people sometimes get misinformation about science, and nutrition is certainly one of those areas, as I'm sure you and your listeners are well aware. And so I think I've just I gained this love in like learning how to read nutrition studies and how to translate them in a way that people can understand, but also to kind of bust, as we're going to do today, bust some of the common myths about nutrition and what maybe provide a different perspective on what might be in the mainstream media where nutrition science often gets misrepresented.
100% it gets misrepresented. A lot of times we'll Google something up and we'll get the scientific report from some massive university with people that are way too smart and words that are way too big. And we dive into the first paragraph and we're like, okay, you lost me. I'm going to the grocery store and I'm just going to buy whatever I want. So the connection between science and nutrition is a big one, and you're going to help us destroy the myths, right?
I hope so. Yeah, there's often a fine line, and I guess that's another thing that I'm trying to do with my writing, and that we at Examine tried to do. There's the scientists talking and publishing their articles, which most people can't understand, and then there's kind of the way too dumbed down version of science that you sometimes read. It's like, oh, this study found eggs are bad for you, so don't eat eggs. It's like at Examine and in my own writing, I try to find that fine line between like, let's give people credit in terms of giving them more credit, for them being educated and things like that, but at the same time making things understandable. So hopefully we can do a little bit of that today.
So this is a cool study that we found on examine.com, 21 nutrition myths that just won't go away. But before we dive into these 21 myths, explain to everybody what examine.com does and what its mission is.
Yeah, at Examine, our mission is to tell you what works and what doesn't so you can be healthier. And the way in which we do that is by publishing summaries of studies, providing you with the most comprehensive, or what we think is the most comprehensive database on the internet about studies on nutrition and supplements and diets, and then providing a comprehensive kind of suite of just health topics, supplements, diets, interventions like exercise, and giving you the latest, most up-to-date, and the most unbiased evidence on all of those, so that users can make informed decisions about whether they should supplement something, whether something works, or whether it's, probably not worth your time or money. And I think The main thing I'd examine that we pride ourselves in is being free of conflicts of interest or affiliations with supplement companies. And that's important to us because when we're writing about whether a supplement's good or bad, you kind of know that we don't have, a supplement company in our back pocket.
This is true. Okay, so this is going to be a comprehensive look at what's true and what's false when it comes to nutrition. And sometimes, and you mentioned this, social media, you got influencers, you got journalists that are trying to go viral with some sort of post. We don't know what to believe, so then we just believe everything we hear. We are gullible. So let's take the first myth, and that is that protein is bad for you. People say too much protein can damage the kidneys and it's going to harm your bones. What's the truth there?
Yeah, so harming the bones and the kidneys, this was evidence that kind of came up a long time ago. And so some studies linked high protein diets to more calcium in people's urines, and then high protein diets to an elevated level of a marker of kidney function. And people kind of drew the conclusion that eating too much protein it leaches calcium from your bones, or it might put too much stress on your kidneys and cause them to fail, causing kidney failure, kidney disease, and things like that. Most of that has completely been disproven. People with kidney disease are often prescribed low protein diets, but that is because their kidneys don't function normally. So adding too much protein and having those kidneys work harder to metabolize that protein is obviously going to stress their kidneys. But not everyone has chronic kidney disease. Most people don't have chronic kidney disease. And so a high protein intake isn't going to be harmful for those people. And so kind of research now is swinging the other way. In fact, I mean, if you look at all of the research on protein intake and bone health, protein seems to be great for bone health, especially for older adults and especially for women who are nearing menopause or post-menopause, where bone health definitely becomes an issue and your risk of fracture becomes increased, your risk of osteoporosis, osteopenia, things like that increases. Protein is protective against bone loss and muscle mass loss with aging. So it's incredibly important to eat a high quality diet that includes a lot of protein. And there's a lot of studies that are being published recently, and I think most experts would kind of agree that eat as much protein as you can. I mean, obviously you want to eat, some fruits and vegetables and things like that to get, your carbs and your healthy fats, but protein definitely should be the mainstay of most people's diets. And there really seem to be no harm to eating quote unquote too much protein, which I don't really think too much is really accurate.
And too much could be, overdosing on, like you're having 6 ounces, 5 or 6 or 7 times a day. But when you talk about the protein, we want to get protein from natural sources, or we want to use a protein supplement. And is it the size of your palm of your hand?
Yeah, so I think it really all kind of just depends on personal preference here. I think if you would prefer to maybe space out your protein intake and 2, 3, or 4 meals during the day of maybe 20 grams each, that's fine. If you wanted to, there are some people now who are eating 1 meal a day, and I don't necessarily find that to be too pleasant, but you could eat 100 grams of protein at one time, and I think that would probably be fine as well. I think a more kind of sustainable and a more moderate approach would be, just, eat 3 meals per day, maybe include 20 to 30 grams of protein each in those meals. Ideally from whole food sources, but if you need to consume a protein powder, maybe it's more convenient, or maybe it's after a workout and you don't necessarily have time for a full meal, protein powders work just fine there as well.
And since we're talking about protein, another myth is you need to eat protein right after your workout. Is that true or false?
Yeah, that's not necessarily true either. So the protein after your workout, it largely has to do with this idea, or this once held idea. It was about something called the anabolic window. And basically that was like in the 30 minutes after your workout, your muscles are somehow more sensitive to protein, and that if you eat, so that you need to refuel right after your workout to kind of maximize your gains in strength and muscle mass. And that if you miss this 30-minute window, you're not going to get the benefits of your workout or get the benefits of your protein. And so I once did this as well, like immediately after all my runs when I was in high school, I would like eat something right away to take advantage of that. But most of the evidence now doesn't really support the anabolic window. I think ideally, you should eat something after a workout to refuel your body. And you might be hungry. So, go ahead and eat a meal or have a protein shake. But what seems to matter most is your protein intake throughout the entire day. So as long as you're eating enough, from the time you finish your workout to the time you go to bed at night, your overall protein seems to be more important than sort of when that protein is ingested.
Okay, next myth. Carbs are bad for you, but I say all carbs are not created equal.
All carbs are certainly, not created equal. There are refined carbs, so we think of those as the white carbs from like white bread, and then you have whole grain carbohydrates, you have, sourdough bread. So carbs just unfortunately get lumped into this one term that's, demonizes carbs. And, carbs don't just come from bread, they can also come from fruits.
Sure.
Vegetables have carbs, complex carbohydrates. So carbs are bad for you. That is certainly a myth. Why they have been kind of vilified so much is due to this concept that's known as the carbohydrate insulin model. And some people have proposed this to basically say that carbs are the cause of obesity, because what happens when you eat carbohydrates is that your blood sugar increases, and to reduce that blood sugar, your body releases a hormone called insulin, and that's a storage hormone. So insulin promotes the storage of fat, and so largely people just drew the logical conclusion that eating carbs thus kind of promotes obesity. And there's some evidence to support this carbohydrate insulin model. But when you put this to the test in a study, so say you have people eat a high carbohydrate diet, maybe 1,800 calories per day, or a high fat diet with low carbohydrates, they tend to lose a similar amount of weight. And so that would kind of largely prove the myth that carbs are the cause of obesity. But I will say that there are some studies and some recent evidence showing refined carbohydrates, so your processed foods, your foods high in sugar, high in refined carbohydrates, they may lead to obesity by causing you to eat more. So most of us know that, if you eat a fatty meal with a lot of protein, you might be like full and satisfied after. But if you eat something with only carbohydrates, maybe some pasta with a little bit of sauce without much protein in there, you might be hungry soon afterwards. And so eating refined carbohydrates tends to just promote people to eat more, and then they could kind of be bad if they, promote you to have a greater appetite than, say, a high fat, low carb diet.
Well, and that's something really good to keep in mind too, when you're just like, oh, I'll just have a plate of pasta. Like maybe that's not the right answer. I'm a big fan, and I didn't know I was a big fan until a trainer and a nutritionist said to me, why are you not, you don't cut out the carbs, eat complex carbohydrates, because your body's going to be able to use those better.
Definitely. And they do also promote kind of a lower and a less pronounced blood sugar spike. So if you eat some pasta with sauce versus some pasta with some cheese and a few meatballs in there, again, same type of carbohydrate, but eating that fat and protein with the carb can help reduce that blood sugar spike, but also the complex carbs. So if you eat, say, a whole grain pasta versus a white pasta, that could also be better as well.
So let's talk about fat, because a lot of people, I can't eat fat, you get fat, but there are some good fats. So the myth, fats are bad for you.
Yeah, myth, fats are bad for you. So fat has, and in particular, saturated fat has been linked to cardiovascular disease and atherosclerosis, because people kind of once thought, they had this idea that is not necessarily correct, that you eat fat and it'll clog up your arteries like a pipe. So that's kind of not necessarily correct. But saturated fat, if eaten in higher quantities, can elevate cholesterol levels, which may be a concern for some people. There's definitely a large debate kind of in nutrition about that. But there are good fats, and there are, I won't even call them bad fats, because I don't think bad is the right word. So yeah, good fats, those are going to come from things like nuts, avocados, your fatty fish. And then the saturated fats will come from things like dairy, red meat, butter. So largely your kind of like animal-based foods. But a diet should contain all of them. So you do want to have some saturated fat in your diet. And most people would tend to agree that having a majority of more unsaturated fat, so omega-3, omega-6s, is probably better. But you should certainly include all those fats in your diet. But eating more fat certainly doesn't make you fat. There's
Right.
plenty
Right.
of good evidence that, you can eat a high fat diet and still lose weight. So the ketogenic diet,
Right.
for example,
Yep.
is incredibly high in fat. Almost 70 to 80% of all your calories on that diet are coming from fat. But that's a great diet for promoting weight loss for some people.
For sure. And those are unsaturated fats, your omega-3s, your omega-6 fatty acids. It's interesting, too. I think if you're looking at your fat intake, you just need to be mindful of which fats you are eating.
Yes, absolutely. I think be mindful. There's this idea that if you're eating no carbohydrates and all fats, that you can kind of eat, butter and bacon all day. I don't necessarily think that that's the healthiest approach. So yeah, I would advise people just to be mindful of what fats you're eating and make sure to get a variety of saturated and unsaturated fats from all different sources.
And what says dropping a tab of butter in your black coffee?
Yeah, that's the bulletproof coffee trend, I think is what people call it. I've only tried it once or twice. It wasn't great. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah, I don't want to mess up my black coffee. I like it that way. Just fine. Thanks so much. Speaking of coffee, and that leads me to breakfast. Myth number, whatever number we're on right now, egg yolks are bad for you. Now, my mother, who was very healthy, she was a nurse. She was a very balanced eater. She never ate the yolk because she said there was just too much cholesterol in it. But I have always heard the opposite, that the yolks are actually the best part of the egg. What's the truth?
Yeah, the yolks are the most nutritious, part of the egg. There's protein in the egg whites, so you want to eat the egg whites as well. The yolk does contain, cholesterol, which some people are concerned about. But again, I think the idea that cholesterol from your diet automatically means, there's more cholesterol in your blood, and that's going to cause cardiovascular disease has kind of been disproven. But yeah, the egg yolks, they contain something called choline, which is very, very good for brain health. So eating a couple eggs per day can definitely be good for brain health. They contain, saturated fat, but also some good fats. They contain a lot of vitamins and minerals as well. So I certainly would not skip out on the egg yolk. If you are concerned about your saturated fat and cholesterol, maybe be mindful. Maybe, if you're going to have a 4-egg omelet, maybe ditch the yolks for 2 of those eggs. But I certainly think there's a lot of nutrition in the yolks, and you don't want to be discarding those.
Another myth that red meat is bad for you and it causes cancer or you'll get gout. Is this sort of like an everything in moderation situation?
Yes, it is. And even then, I don't even know. I mean, I would certainly tell everyone to, not probably eat steak for every meal every single day. But I really think that red meat has just been unfairly demonized, and that kind of came from the saturated fat hypothesis that it contains a lot of saturated fat and is therefore going to cause cardiovascular disease. There were some studies linking red meat to increased prostate and colorectal cancer. But I think what's important to note here is that most, and I would say probably all of this evidence comes from observational studies. That basically just means that these studies are showing that people who eat more red meat had higher rates of cancer or higher rates of cardiovascular disease or higher rates of diabetes. And what that does is show it an association. Red meat is associated with these diseases, but that doesn't prove causation. Does red meat actually cause diabetes or cause cardiovascular disease? That doesn't seem to be the case. And I think the reason for that association is that, the type of red meat isn't really accounted for. So are people eating, more McDonald's burgers, which are red meat, or are they eating more grass-fed steaks? It seems to be
right.
The former. And, what are they eating that red meat with? Is it with a diet soda and fried McDonald's French fries, or is it, a steak with broccolini and like a baked potato or something like that? So there's a lot of issues with how red meat has been associated with all of these diseases. And so the fears about red meat causing cancer and all these other diseases are definitely, I think, broad, and this is kind of a myth as well.
It's interesting, too, because all the myths to me just seems like a balancing act. Seems like pay attention to what you're eating, make sure it's the good part of what the myth says is bad, and then don't overdo it. Much like our next myth, which is salt is bad for you. Now, I love salty snack foods. Yes, I know that's highly processed, and that's salt on top of it also not so good for me. But too much salt can also cause hypertension, high blood pressure. But don't we need salt in our bodies for overall wellness?
Yes, we definitely need salt. It's important for proper blood pressure regulation, kind of among other important processes. And certainly too much salt can be harmful. There are a certain sect of people who have something called salt sensitive hypertension. And what that means is that if they eat a high salt meal or increase their salt intake, their blood pressure will increase in the short term and kind of in the long term. And so for those people, excessive salt intake can be harmful and they should probably be on a reduced sodium diet. But on the other hand, most healthy people who can regulate, whose bodies can regulate their electrolyte balance and their salt balance, I think, a moderate, again, we'll keep using this word probably throughout the podcast, but a moderate intake of salt, I think is certainly fine. And I'm not up sure what the latest recommendations are from like the American Heart Association, but I think they've largely removed some of their more stringent sodium intake limits for most healthy people. In reducing your salt intake too much can actually lead to issues as well. So you could experience too low of blood pressure and your food won't taste good. So I think there are, benefits to adding salt to your diet for sure. One, it's tasty. And then two, our body does need salt and sodium. And ultimately, if we do increase our salt intake, our body will largely take care of that by just urinating most of the excess salt out. Anyway, our kidneys do a very good job at regulating that. So I think salt and then also focusing on potassium intake is something important for people as well, because a lot of the issues necessarily, obviously too much salt isn't an issue, but too little potassium intake is an issue for some people. And we need potassium as well to kind of regulate our sodium and potassium balance in the body.
I think we just need you on speed dial when we have a question, when we're about to put something in our mouth, Brady. Let's talk about dietary supplements. A lot of us spending a lot of money at the vitamin stores, the various vitamin stores that we may go into thinking, I'm going to take this supplement. Dietary supplements are necessary is the myth. Can they support a healthy diet where we may not be getting the nutrients? And are we overtaking these supplements? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we know a lot about this at Examine. Supplements are kind of our foundation of what we write about. I definitely think that we, as kind of a nation, probably overtake supplements. There's this funny quote, and I don't know kind of where it came from, but someone once said that, Americans have the most expensive urine in the world because, all taking multivitamins, just peeing out all the vitamins. I think that taking a daily multivitamin, there's certainly no harm to that. If most people want to do that to kind of cover their bases. Again, if most of these multivitamins contain amounts of vitamins that you're not going to overdose on or lead to some sort of vitamin toxicity if you're taking the recommended amount. So if you want to take it, if you feel good taking a multivitamin and have the budget to do so, I think that's completely fine. But there's not really much evidence to support that people who take a multivitamin tend to be healthier than people who don't. So I think with supplementing, identifying specific areas that your diet might lack or specific areas in your life where you're looking for a boost and finding a supplement to target that specific area is probably the best approach. So for instance, if someone chooses to eat a vegan diet that might be deficient in vitamin B12, they, could take a vitamin B12 supplement. Mothers who are pregnant will supplement with folate, folic acid, and things like that. And then, athletes or, people who are exercising, they might want to supplement with something like creatine to boost their muscle strength. So those are just examples of all of those things can be obtained in the diet, but maybe your diet is short on those, or maybe you want some extra of those nutrients, and therefore you can find a supplement to fit one of those needs. I definitely think with the proliferation of influencers on social media, most people are probably over supplementing, especially on supplements where, truth be told, there's kind of very little evidence to support that they actually work. Vitamin D is kind of one of those. I think
right.
Vitamin D is certainly important. I mean, our body, we need vitamin D, and many people are vitamin D deficient.
Right, especially in the winter months.
Especially in the winter. Yeah, you want to prevent seasonal affective disorder. supplementing with vitamin D when you're not getting the sun, but it's been promoted to have kind of all of these miraculous, wonderful effects that truthfully haven't kind of like been shown in the research. So I think most people may be over supplementing, but again, that doesn't mean supplements are useless. You just have to find the ones that work for you and give your body what you need.
And I gave this is my little trick for supplements. And I gave it to Dr. Oz. He loved it. You can steal it, Brady. No problem. I call it the MOD theory, modify your diet with supplements. And if you're really at a loss and you don't know where to go, multivitamin, omega-3s, and vitamin D, MOD, modify your diet. Do you like it?
I love that. I love that. And I think it's important too to realize what the word supplement actually means. Supplement means to add something onto your diet. Supplements aren't meant to replace something in your diet.
Correct. And side note, you mentioned that Americans have the most expensive urine in the world. There's several companies doing pee cycling, turning human urine into fertilizer, which is fascinating to me. Sounds gross. Look into it. It's kind of cool. Let me get to the next one, and that is you shouldn't skip breakfast because it's the most important meal of the day. A lot of people don't even eat but one meal late in the afternoon. True or false?
Yeah, breakfast being the most important meal of the day, definitely I think is kind of a marketing campaign. And I think we've placed too much importance on the importance of breakfast, I guess, so to speak. So I think this fear, or this idea that skipping breakfast can be bad. There are like some studies that show people who skip breakfast may have a higher BMI, or they may weigh more than people who tend to eat breakfast. But again, that's confounded because these are just, like I said before, association studies. Eating breakfast, if it promotes your satiety and allows you to eat less throughout the day and maybe gives you energy to be more active during the day, then that can be great. Some people enjoy waking up and eating breakfast. I'm not one of those people. I also am a self-proclaimed breakfast skipper. I don't really eat until 11 or 12. So I do my first meal at noon, but I think skipping breakfast, it's not going to slow down your metabolism. If you don't want to eat it, it's completely fine. I think the only harms of skipping breakfast could be that if you compensate for that lack of breakfast by eating more than you normally would throughout the rest of the day. So maybe you skip breakfast and then compensate for that with a 10 p.m. raid of the pantry because you're so ravenous.
Right.
So,
or you're just eating snacks all afternoon because you deprived yourself of something in the morning. Let me ask you this. I eat late and I get up really early, so I'm going to bed early. And even my physicians, primary care doctors are like, try to eat 2 hours before you go to bed because you're really working your digestive system overtime when you're trying to sleep and you're trying to digest. So the myth is to lose fat, don't eat before bed.
For weight loss, that doesn't really seem to be the case. It doesn't seem to really matter what time you eat. Obviously, eating a particularly large meal very soon before you go to bed is kind of uncomfortable, and it will, you are going to lay down. And so your body it wants to get into this rest mode. It shouldn't be working to digest this huge meal you just ate. And I do think that eating very late night meals can impact your sleep in a negative way. But if weight loss is kind of your concern, again, I think overall what really matters is just the overall calorie intake during the day. So yes, if you're eating more than you normally would, having like this unhealthy late night snack before bed, then that could promote weight gain. But I think that there's this idea that, if you eat something and then just lay down, your body will store that instead of use it. But if you're not eating in a caloric excess, then it doesn't really seem to matter. But I certainly wouldn't recommend eating right before you go to bed. I'd give yourself a few hours. I think 2 to 3 is kind of a good recommendation if that's something people can do.
I think so too. Probably sleep better anyway. This is maybe not a myth, but something we all hear: an apple a day keeps the doctor away.
That's definitely a myth. I mean, if you like apples, I guess that can be great. But I don't think there's people who eat more apples. I'm not aware of any studies that show that they get sick less or visit the doctor any less.
True. And let me ask you this one too. A healthy diet can help our minds be more creative.
I don't necessarily think that's a myth. I mean, so there's this interesting new, I won't necessarily call it new, but there's this diet that researchers have been studying recently. It's called the MIND diet. So it's essentially the Mediterranean diet, or a version of the Mediterranean diet, but it focuses on these foods that are high in these plant compounds called polyphenols and antioxidants that are supposed to promote brain health. Things like blueberries, for instance, that and walnuts and things, fish with omega-3s and things like that. So that's just one example. And, I don't have a particular bias to the MIND diet or anything like that, but I definitely think that eating a healthier diet can lead to healthier brain aging. There have been studies to show that. Perhaps that's due to these specific compounds in these plants promoting brain health. I think, though, sometimes we place a little too much emphasis on that, and we'd like to say that, oh, blueberries are good for the brain because they have these antioxidants in it. I think overall, why a healthy diet promotes more creativity or a healthier brain is just that you have more energy and you feel better, and you're at a lower risk for disease. So your mind is going to be clearer, and you're going to be more creative.
I love it. I love it, Brady. Lots to think about here, especially when it comes to just our own particular lifestyles. I do believe we need to know the foundation of these myths, whether they're true or false, but I think we also need to dive into it and learn a little bit more as it pertains to what we do. I know we skimmed through a lot of the myths, but if someone wants to learn more, they want the research because we love data, where can they find you and learn more about these 21 myths?
For sure. So the myths that we've been chatting about today, those can be found on examine.com. If you search awful nutrition myths in the search bar on Examine, you should be able to find that article there. It's under one of our health articles. And, there's plenty of other content to browse and explore on the Examine website. If listeners are liked this conversation, they'll certainly kind of like what is to be found on examine.com. If listeners would like to find me, I can be found primarily on my Substack, which is where I post most of my content. That's physiologicallyspeaking.com. I didn't pick the most easy to spell domain, but that was the name of my blog, and I just decided to migrate that over to my domain name. But I also just have a website where I post a lot of my personal content, and that's bradyholmer.com. And then maybe if people use X, formerly known as Twitter, I can be found at B_Holmer, HOLMER, on there. And I'm quite active on Twitter. And I hope that people found this conversation interesting, and that they've, have some myths that were busted, and that they can make their diet better because of it.
I'm telling you, we're just going to put you on speed dial.
I'm here whenever you need me.
Brady Holmer, he's a scientist, a writer, a performance geek. Brady, thank you so much for joining us on Creative Living.
Live better, creatively. For more inspiration, visit janeklaus.com. Thank you for listening.